You find yourself standing at the edge of an ancient Persian village, the air thick with tension and uncertainty. The distant sound of footsteps approaches, echoing through the narrow streets as families whisper in hushed tones, fearful of the fate that awaits their sons. In this moment, you witness the cruel hand of the empire as agents sweep through, selecting young boys, barely on the cusp of manhood, to serve a fate wrought with unimaginable horror. These innocent lives will soon be thrust into a world of brutality, transformed into eunuchs forever altered, stripped of their futures, and bound to a life of servitude within the opulent yet unforgiving confines of the imperial court. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please, comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. In the vast expanse of the ancient Persian Empire, where the sun cast long shadows over marble palaces and bustling markets alike, there existed a grim reality hidden behind the opulence of royal courts and imperial grandeur. It was a reality lived by young boys, often barely more than children, selected from far-flung provinces and conquered lands to serve a fate as cruel as it was unyielding. These boys were destined to become eunuchs, a class forged through ritual and brutality, stripped not only of their physical wholeness but of their very futures. The world of the Achaemenid Empire, stretching from the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia to the arid reaches of Persia, was one ruled by power and control, where the demands of empire shaped every aspect of life. Among these demands was the creation of a loyal servant class, individuals who could be trusted near the heart of power precisely because they could not threaten it through progeny or ambition. Thus, the eunuchs, boys severed from their potential to father heirs, became indispensable yet profoundly tragic figures within the imperial order. Their story begins in the shadows, away from the marble halls and the golden thrones. It starts in villages and towns where families, often desperate or coerced, surrendered their sons to agents of the empire. These boys were plucked from the warmth of home and the safety of childhood, only to be thrust into a world where their bodies and identities would be forever altered. The process was neither gentle nor hidden. It was a brutal rite of passage, a transformation imposed with little regard for pain or consent. The castration rituals themselves were acts of terrifying violence, performed without the relief of anesthesia, often by rudimentary methods. They left physical scars that mirrored the deeper wounds inflicted on the soul. For these boys, the procedure was not merely a medical ordeal but a violent severing of their futures, a forced passage from boyhood into a liminal existence caught between genders and roles. The castration was a cruel form of bodily control, one that rendered them permanently marked, both physically and socially, as property of the empire. Yet, the act of castration was only the beginning of their suffering. Once altered, these boys faced a lifetime shaped by servitude and marginalization. Their lives became entwined with the rhythms of the court, bound by strict rules and expectations that dictated everything from their movements to their interactions. They were both insiders and outsiders, granted access to the inner sanctums of power, yet forever barred from the lineage and legacies that defined Persian aristocracy. This hidden world of eunuchs was one of contradictions. On one hand, they occupied positions of influence, entrusted with guarding the royal harem, managing palace affairs, and advising kings. Their unique status made them indispensable intermediaries between the ruler and his subjects. On the other hand, their very existence was a testament to loss and control, a reminder of the empire's capacity to impose its will, not just on lands and peoples but on bodies and identities. For modern audiences, uncovering these obscured stories is more than an exercise in historical curiosity. It is an act of empathy and recognition. The lives of these young boys, marked by trauma and resilience, challenge us to confront the darker mechanisms of power that have shaped human societies across millennia. They remind us that beneath the grand narratives of empire lie countless individual stories of suffering and endurance, often erased by time and silence. To understand the fate of these Persian eunuchs is to peer into a world where childhood was stolen, where bodies were reshaped to serve political ends, and where identity was a fragile construct constantly negotiated within the confines of imperial ambition. Their hidden suffering calls us to bridge the emotional gap between past cruelty and present compassion, to acknowledge the humanity behind the history. As the empire expanded and its courts grew ever more elaborate, the presence of eunuchs became an accepted if somber reality. Their lives were a testament to the costs of empire, a human price paid in flesh and spirit. The majestic palaces of Persepolis and Susa, with their intricate reliefs and towering columns, bore silent witness to the countless boys who had passed through their gates, boys who would never return home as they once were. The rituals that transformed these children into eunuchs were shrouded in secrecy and fear, yet they were a known and feared aspect of Persian imperial policy. Families understood, often too late or under duress, that the empire's reach extended into the most intimate aspects of life. To be chosen as a eunuch was to be severed from the ordinary course of human experience, to become an instrument of the state's will, marked by a cruel paradox, valued for loyalty, yet stripped of personal freedom and identity. In this context, the story of the Persian eunuchs unfolds not as a mere footnote in history, but as a vital if painful chapter in the human saga. It is a story of power wielded over bodies, of innocence lost to the machinery of empire, and of resilience in the face of profound injustice. These boys, transformed against their will, lived lives that were at once privileged and tragic, bound to the empire's heart, yet forever excluded from its legacy. By bringing their experiences to light, we confront a past that is uncomfortable, yet necessary to remember. The hidden suffering of these young eunuchs is a mirror reflecting the enduring complexities of human power and vulnerability. Their lives invite us to listen closely, to honor their pain, and to recognize the lasting imprint of imperial ambition on the most vulnerable. As we begin to trace their journey, from the moment of selection through the harrowing transformation and into the labyrinth of court life, we step into a world where history's grandeur coexists with personal tragedy. The eunuchs of Persia, though often forgotten, stand as silent witnesses to the empire's reach, an empire that shaped not only lands and peoples but the very bodies and identities of those deemed necessary for its survival. In uncovering their stories, we do more than recount historical facts. We reclaim voices lost to time, shedding light on the human cost behind the splendor of ancient Persia. Their tale is a call to remember that history is made not only by kings and conquerors, but by the quiet endurance of those who bore the weight of empire in ways both seen and unseen. Within the sprawling courts of the Persian Empire, eunuchs occupied a paradoxical position, both indispensable and marginalized, powerful yet profoundly constrained. Their presence was woven into the intricate fabric of court life, where trust was a currency as valuable as gold, and loyalty was enforced by the most intimate forms of control. To understand the role of eunuchs in Persian society is to grasp the delicate balance between authority and vulnerability, between privilege and dehumanization. Eunuchs were not simply servants, they were pivotal actors within the imperial machinery. Their unique status as castrated men rendered them, in the eyes of the Persian rulers, safe and reliable guardians of the most sensitive domains. This perception stemmed from the belief that, unable to father children, eunuchs posed no threat to dynastic succession, making them ideal custodians of the royal harem and trusted attendants to the king himself. Their physical alteration was thus transformed into a political asset, a mark of loyalty etched into flesh. In the courts, eunuchs served as gatekeepers, advisors, and administrators. Entrusted with guarding the royal women, they acted as intermediaries between the secluded female quarters and the male-dominated political sphere. This role granted them access to secrets and influence that few others could claim. Their proximity to power allowed some eunuchs to rise in rank, accumulating wealth and prestige, effectively becoming indispensable cogs in the imperial engine. Yet this prominence was always shadowed by their altered bodies and the social stigma that accompanied them. The institution of eunuchs in Persia was deeply intertwined with notions of control over the palace, over succession, and over the delicate balance of gendered power. By removing the possibility of offspring, the empire sought to ensure that those closest to the throne could not establish rival dynasties. This strategy reveals the intersection of gender and power politics in ancient Persia, where the body was manipulated to serve the stability of the state. Eunuchs embodied this manipulation, their identities shaped and constrained by imperial paranoia and ambition. However, the value placed on eunuchs was a double-edged sword. While they enjoyed privileges denied to many others, education, positions of influence, and material comforts, they remained outsiders in a society that prized masculinity and lineage. Their castration marked them as different, as incomplete, alienating them from traditional male roles and expectations. This dehumanization was institutionalized, a constant reminder of their subordinate status despite their proximity to power. In the Persian court, eunuchs navigated a complex social hierarchy. Their rank could vary widely from lowly servants to high-ranking officials, but their identity as eunuchs remained a defining characteristic. This status shaped their interactions with nobles, soldiers, and other courtiers, often subjecting them to suspicion and prejudice. Yet some eunuchs leveraged their unique position to carve out niches of influence, becoming indispensable counselors or trusted confidants to the king. Their survival depended on a delicate balance of loyalty, intelligence, and discretion. The paradox of the eunuch's existence extended beyond social status into the realm of personal identity. Stripped of their physical manhood, eunuchs occupied a liminal space, neither fully male nor female, challenging the rigid gender binaries of their time. This ambiguity could be both a source of power and alienation. Within the palace walls, eunuchs often formed close-knit communities, relying on one another for support and solidarity in a world that viewed them as other. Their roles also had deep psychological implications. Entrusted with guarding the intimate lives of the royal family, they bore witness to secrets and intrigues inaccessible to most. This knowledge could empower eunuchs, but also isolate them, burdening them with loyalty to a regime that had permanently altered their bodies. The tension between agency and victimhood was a defining feature of their existence, as they maneuvered within a system that both elevated and exploited them. The Persian eunuch's position was emblematic of the broader dynamics of power in the empire. They were living embodiments of the state's reach into private life, tools of control wielded to maintain order and hierarchy. Their bodies were sites where political strategy and personal suffering converged, revealing the intimate costs of imperial ambition. The empire's reliance on eunuchs underscores how deeply power relied on shaping not only laws and armies but the very identities of individuals. This system also reflected the empire's complex attitudes towards gender and sexuality. Eunuchs challenged conventional notions of masculinity, existing outside the traditional frameworks that defined Persian society. Their presence in the court was a constant reminder of the fluidity and contingency of gender roles, shaped by political necessity rather than nature. Yet, despite their unique status, eunuchs rarely escaped the stigma associated with their condition, facing social exclusion and marginalization beyond the palace gates. Still, the stories of individual eunuchs reveal a spectrum of experiences. Some rose to prominence, wielding considerable influence and navigating court intrigues with skill. Others remained confined to menial tasks, their lives marked by invisibility and hardship. The eunuch's fate was shaped by circumstances, personality, and the shifting tides of imperial favor. Their collective existence, however, was defined by a shared condition that bound them to the empire's ambitions and its harshest demands. In this light, eunuchs can be seen as both agents and victims within the Persian court. They were active participants in the exercise of power, yet their very bodies bore the marks of subjugation. Their presence complicates simple narratives of domination and resistance, illustrating how power operates through both coercion and consent, privilege and vulnerability. The eunuch's role was as much about survival within a system as it was about service to the empire. The Persian rulers' trust in eunuchs was not misplaced. Their loyalty was often unwavering, forged in the crucible of shared sacrifice and altered destinies. Yet this loyalty came at a profound personal cost, as eunuchs lived with the knowledge that their bodies were forever changed for the sake of political expediency. Their lives were a testament to the ways in which empire reshaped human existence, turning individuals into instruments of statecraft. Understanding the role of eunuchs in Persian society thus requires a recognition of the complex interplay between power, gender, and identity. They were central to the empire's functioning, yet fundamentally othered by the very conditions that made them valuable. Their story reveals how ancient systems of governance relied not only on armies and laws, but on the control and transformation of bodies. As we delve deeper into their lives, the eunuchs emerge not as mere historical curiosities, but as vital actors within the Persian world. Their experiences illuminate the intricate dynamics of court life and the human costs embedded within imperial structures. Through their eyes, we glimpse a world where loyalty was bought with sacrifice, where power was inseparable from pain, and where the boundaries of identity were both enforced and blurred by the demands of empire. In the shadows of Persian palaces, eunuchs stood as living symbols of the empire's reach, figures whose bodies and lives were shaped by the intersection of political necessity and social prejudice. Their story challenges us to reconsider the notions of power and humanity, revealing the hidden costs behind the splendor and might of one of history's greatest empires. In the vast and diverse territories of the Persian Empire, the selection of boys destined to become eunuchs was a somber and often ruthless process, deeply entwined with the empire's mechanisms of control and domination. These young lives, chosen from among the conquered peoples or the empire's lower social strata, were subjected to a fate that would forever alter their existence. The process itself was a grim testament to the empire's reach into the most intimate aspects of human life, where political expediency overrode compassion and consent. The selection of these boys was no random act, but a calculated strategy. Agents of the empire scoured towns and villages, identifying children whose families were vulnerable, often those who lived under the shadow of conquest or poverty. These boys were forcibly taken, their removal cloaked in the authority of imperial decree, leaving families powerless to resist. For many, the loss was sudden and incomprehensible. One moment they were children playing in sunlit courtyards, and the next they were torn from home and thrust into an uncertain and brutal world. Once chosen, the boys were subjected to the harrowing ordeal of castration, a rite that was as much a method of political control as it was a physical transformation. The procedure was inflicted with little regard for pain or survival, often carried out by untrained hands using rudimentary tools. The absence of anesthesia meant that the boys endured excruciating agony, their screams echoing through the palace corridors or hidden chambers where the act took place. This violence was not only physical but psychological. The trauma of betrayal and mutilation marked the beginning of a life defined by loss. The brutal nature of the castration reflected the empire's unyielding priorities. It was a violent assertion of dominance, a message to the empire's subjects that bodies could be controlled and shaped to serve the state's needs. The procedure was irreversible, a permanent erasure of the boy's future as a man and a father. It was also a public act in some cases, designed to instill fear and obedience among those who might challenge imperial authority. In the immediate aftermath, these boys faced a world transformed and hostile. Their physical wounds were matched by social isolation. They were removed from their families and communities, cast into a liminal space where they belonged to neither childhood nor adulthood. The stigma of castration barred them from traditional male roles and rites of passage, leaving them adrift in a society that defined identity through lineage and masculinity. Their altered bodies became visible markers of their new status, symbols of imperial control and personal tragedy. The psychological impact of this transformation was profound. Stripped of agency and subjected to ongoing surveillance and control, the eunuchs grappled with a fractured sense of self. Many endured loneliness and alienation, their identities redefined by a state that claimed ownership over their bodies and futures. The trauma did not end with the procedure. It marked the beginning of a lifelong struggle to navigate a world that saw them as tools rather than individuals. Yet, despite the brutality of their initiation, these boys were ushered into roles that carried significant responsibility within the imperial court. Their altered bodies were both a source of vulnerability and a key to survival. The empire's design ensured that eunuchs would be loyal servants, dependent on their patrons and the privileges granted within the palace walls. This dependency was a form of control, binding them to the empire's interests through a combination of fear, obligation, and limited opportunity. The stories of these young boys, though often lost to history, speak to the wider realities of imperial conquest and its human costs. Their selection and castration were acts of violence that extended beyond the individual, touching families and communities in ways that reverberated through generations. The empire's reach was total, encompassing not only land and resources, but the very bodies of its subjects. Within the palace, the eunuchs' altered identities were further enforced through strict codes of behavior and social regulation. They were trained to serve the empire's needs, educated in court etiquette and administration, yet always reminded of their status as both indispensable and disposable. Their lives were circumscribed by rules that dictated their movements, interactions, and even their appearance, reinforcing their separation from the wider society. The physical consequences of castration were severe and enduring. The procedure often led to chronic health problems, including infections, hormonal imbalances, and shortened lifespans. These health issues compounded the psychological toll, as eunuchs faced not only social exclusion but bodily decay. Their survival was a constant negotiation with pain and vulnerability, underscoring the empire's disregard for their humanity. Despite these hardships, many eunuchs developed resilience and adaptability. Some found ways to assert agency within the constraints imposed upon them, forging relationships and alliances that allowed them to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. Their altered status did not preclude ambition or influence. Rather, it reshaped the paths available to them. In this sense, the eunuchs embodied the complex interplay between victimhood and power, suffering and survival. The fate of these boys was also shaped by the broader cultural and political context of the Persian Empire. The empire's vast diversity meant that eunuchs came from a multitude of ethnic and social backgrounds, each bringing their own experiences and challenges. This diversity added layers to their identities, complicating the ways in which they were perceived and treated within the court and beyond. The selection and castration of young boys were thus not isolated acts, but integral components of the empire's governance. They reflected a worldview that prioritized control and order above individual rights and dignity. The eunuchs' bodies became battlegrounds where imperial ambitions played out, marked by pain and resilience in equal measure. In tracing the journey of these boys, From the moment they were chosen, through the trauma of castration to their entry into court life, we witness the profound human costs embedded within the machinery of empire. Their stories demand attention, not only for their historical significance, but for the empathy they evoke, reminding us of the lives shaped by forces beyond their control. Through their suffering and endurance, these boys-turned-eunuchs reveal the darker side of imperial power, a side that reshaped bodies and identities to secure loyalty and dominance. Their experiences challenge us to confront the brutal realities that underpinned one of history's greatest empires, illuminating the personal costs hidden beneath its grandeur. As their voices rise from the margins of history, we are called to acknowledge the pain and loss they endured, to see beyond the political narratives and recognize the human beings behind the transformation. Their stories stand as a testament to the resilience of those who survived unimaginable hardship, forever marked by the empire's unrelenting grasp. Within the labyrinthine walls of the Persian royal palace, eunuchs lived lives marked by a complex interplay of duty, restriction, and subtle influence. Their daily existence was a study in contrasts, wielders of considerable power in certain realms, yet perpetually confined by invisible chains that bound them to roles defined by others. To enter the palace as a eunuch was to step into a world where identity was constantly negotiated, where freedom was circumscribed, and where survival demanded both resilience and adaptability. The eunuch's duties were manifold and critical to the functioning of the court. Tasked with guarding the royal harem, they ensured the security and privacy of the king's women, a role that placed them at the heart of the palace's most secretive quarters. This responsibility was not merely physical, it required discretion, loyalty, and an acute awareness of court intrigues. Through their guardianship, eunuchs became silent witnesses to the intimate and political dramas that shaped imperial life, their presence a safeguard against both internal and external threats. Beyond the harem, eunuchs served as administrators and advisors, entrusted with managing palace affairs, and sometimes mediating between the king and his subjects.